Hey, David Brewster here with another episode of Breaking Chords, and this is Pivot Arpeggios. And I think Gary Moore kind of introduced most rock guitarists to Pivot Arpeggios in his famous End of the World guitar solo. And that song featured these rapid-fire hammer and pull-off, arpeggio movements. And I think that song kind of influenced a ton of guitarists after Gary. Because you can hear this, music from Randy Rhoads and J.K. Lee, Steve Vai, Nuno Bettencourt. There's a whole bunch of players out there that use, these ideas. And in this lesson, we're going to tap into major, minor, and diminished. And if you want to go a little bit further, I actually did have a lesson in Guitar Player Magazine, the holiday 2017 issue with Learning to Fly. And that lesson kind of talked about these arpeggios. I talked about Gary Moore's, End of the World, and Steve Vai and Nuno. And you can find that in this issue, which that looks like a nationwide commercial, with Brett Paisley there. But inside you can find Learning to Fly, and you can also find that on their website too. To get started here, I'm going to target E major, and we're going to hit an E major 7 pivot arpeggio right here. And if we look at the shape, there we can see we've got B, G sharp, E, and D sharp, and those are the 4 notes we need for E major 7. There's your root, your third, your fifth, and major 7, the D sharp. So that's a typical, kind of pivot arpeggio, flow and sound for that pattern of notes. And there I'm basically picking the first note and then a pull off. I'm picking the third note, that E note, and then I'm picking the D sharp and hammering on back to that E. And then you start it all over again. I am picking that G sharp when we return to the high E, but then you start that sequence. Right? Now let's flip that to minor, and we can change that to E minor 7. Like that, and then we've got B, G natural, E, and D natural. So we change the G sharp to G and the D sharp to D, and we convert that to E minor 7. And then just compare that to E major 7. Now with that minor shape, if we lower the fifth, and play B flat, then that's going to change that to E diminished 7. Because there's your B flat, G, E, and D. So there's E diminished 7, E minor 7, and then E major 7. Now if you really want to be crafty, you could keep the B and the G sharp and then sneak down there and grab that D note, and then you're playing E7 or dominant 7. So there's a lot you can do with just that little pattern of notes right there. Now that we've unlocked major, minor, and diminished 7, and also dominant 7 in there too, we can kind of map out and harmonize, the E major scale, and we can kind of move up and down, the B and the high E string here, and flesh out, E major using those arpeggios like this. So there's E major 7. Now move up and play a minor shape, and start right there on the C sharp, and there's F sharp minor. Move up a whole step, and there's G sharp minor. Move up and basically play major right here, start on this E note, and there's A major 7. Now move up here, and we're going to basically move back and grab this A for that major shape, and that's going to be, B dominant 7. Which that's the 5 chord right there. Now move up just a little bit higher, and we're going to basically start here on G sharp, and we have, C sharp minor. Now start right here on A, and you're basically going to move up a little bit higher. Now you have D sharp diminished 7. And then if you move up and start on B, and then revert back to that major 7 arpeggio shape, we're back where we started, with E major 7. So right there, we just mapped out E major on the top 2 strings using those arpeggios. And that kind of reminds me of the intro to Mother Don't Want to Go to School Today, by Extreme. It's very similar to Mother. It's very similar. It's just, kind of in a different key, and Nuno kind of tapped into some different ideas there. But it's very similar to what we did with that harmonized, kind of pivot arpeggio highway. You can find these arpeggios hiding in the classic Steve Vai solo from Ladies' Night in Buffalo, which is back in his David Lee Roth, solo days. And I mentioned this briefly in the Learning to Fly lesson from Guitar Player. But in that solo, Vai is actually shifting pivot arpeggios kind of abruptly. Something like this, and it's tricky. And there you can see we're basically moving from C major 7 right here, and then shift that to the 17th position, and that's going to change it to F major 7. So you're going to hit this 4 times, and then move to F and hit it twice, and then bend that 20th fret on the B string. Vai really loves these arpeggios, and we're going to revert back to the original shape, that E major 7, but we're going to introduce some tapping ideas, and we're also going to shift, the fretted part of the arpeggio right here too. So we're going to start with E major 7 right here, like this. And Vai usually sweeps, like a wah into the tap note sometimes when he does those kind of licks. Now take the fretted part and move that up basically a minor third, to the 7th position, and that's going to change that to an E minor 9. Like that. Really cool. And then you can change positions and change keys. Let's move it to the key of A. So now let's do A major 7. And then move the fretted part up, a minor third to the 12th position, and then you're playing A minor 9. I really like the way that sounds. And you could also move the tap note too. You can move the fretted part with the left hand or fret hand, and the tap part, with the picking hand. This last idea, we're going to basically change positions, and we're going to mimic, some of the things that Gary Moore did in his End of the World solo, where he moved, from one string group and position to another. So let's just tap into this C major 7 arpeggio right here. The one that Nuno tapped into, for the Mother solo. So let's just move that down an octave. So look for your G, E, C, and B, and you can find an octave lower. You can find it right there on the G and the D string. Same arpeggio, just an octave lower. And then do that again. Move down to the A and a low E, and there's your G, E, C, and B. Now, if you wanted to, you can continue tapping, you can move through, the minor and diminished shapes, but the important thing there is kind of noticing how it moves across the strings and where you can find it in other places. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Breaking Chords with a look at pivot arpeggios, and there's a lot you can do with this information. Aside from changing it from major to minor to diminished, you could even tap into augmented if you wanted to. There's a lot you can do with this. So notice some of the players I mentioned, Bettencourt and Vai and Gary Moore and some of these players, and listen to some of those songs and solos. And then experiment, try moving to other keys, other string groups, maybe change the fingering. And there's a lot you can do. You can incorporate some slides. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. So leave some feedback and some comments. Let me know how this material goes. And please subscribe to Late Night Lessons. And I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.